Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going on a historical journey, walking step by step through the single most devastating conflict in human history. We are not just listing dates, we are telling the story of how the world fell into darkness and how it found its way back. This narrative is designed for everyone, so do not worry about needing a history degree to follow along. Just listen, imagine the scenes, and understand the sequence of events that shaped our modern world. Our story does not begin with the first shot of the war, but about 20 years earlier, in the aftermath of another brutal conflict. The First World War ended in 1918, leaving Europe in ruins. A treaty was signed in a palace in France, the Treaty of Versailles, and it was meant to bring permanent peace. Instead, it planted seeds of deep resentment. The treaty forced Germany to accept full blame for starting the war, which felt humiliating to the German people. On top of that psychological weight, they were handed an astronomical bill for all the damage caused, a debt so massive it crushed their economy. Their military was essentially dismantled, and their territories were stripped away. These conditions created a fertile ground for extremism. The 1920s brought hyperinflation to Germany, where money became worthless and people's life savings vanished overnight. The global economic depression in the early 1930s made things infinitely worse, with massive unemployment and poverty. In this environment of chaos and despair, a charismatic speaker named Adolf Hitler rose to prominence. He did not talk about complex economic policies. He pointed fingers, identified scapegoats, and promised to tear up the Treaty of Versailles. He spoke of restoring German pride to a wounded nation. By 1933, his party, the Nazi Party, had taken control of the government, and he was appointed chancellor. The stage was set, not for peace, but for an even greater catastrophe, built on the unresolved anger of a previous war. The world was watching, but it was not yet ready to act. As we move forward on our timeline, a new and terrifying pattern began to emerge in the mid-1930s, a pattern of aggression met with silence. The strongest nations, those who had won the last war and were committed to democracy, had adopted a policy of appeasement. The memories of the trenches were still too fresh, and the public in Britain and France was desperate to avoid another war at almost any cost. This fear, while understandable, was like a green light for dictators. The first major test came in 1936, in a country that was not Germany but Spain. A civil war erupted between the elected Republican government and a group of nationalist rebels led by General Francisco Franco. On the surface, this was a Spanish issue, but underneath, it became a proxy war, a grim rehearsal for the coming World War. Adolf Hitler and Italy's fascist leader, Benito Mussolini, sent airplanes, tanks, and soldiers to support Franco. One of the most infamous moments was the bombing of a small Basque town called Guernica by a German air unit called the Condor Legion. It was a market day, and civilian lives were the primary target. This was not just a military operation, it was a terrifying experiment in terror bombing, a test to see how effectively an air force could destroy a city and break a population's spirit. Meanwhile, the democratic powers of the world declared a policy of non-intervention, effectively leaving the Spanish Republic unable to buy weapons to defend itself. This silence proved to Hitler that the democracies were paralyzed by fear. While the world's attention was on Spain, he remilitarized the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone along the French border, sending German troops marching in, again without consequence. Every unchallenged step made him bolder, and the next step would involve absorbing his homeland, Austria, directly into the growing German Reich. The timeline now brings us to the incredibly tense year of 1938, a year when the map of Europe began to be redrawn not by diplomats, but by threats. Adolf Hitler's ambition was not just to rebuild Germany but to create a greater German empire that included all German-speaking peoples. The next logical target was his birth country, Austria. In March, after intense political pressure and a staged crisis, German soldiers crossed the border and were met not with resistance, but with cheering crowds. This event, known as the Anschluss, the political union between Germany and Austria, was strictly forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles, but the international response was, once again, a collective shrug of passive disapproval. Emboldened by this, Hitler immediately turned his attention to a region of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. This border area was home to millions of ethnic Germans, and Hitler began to publicly accuse the Czechoslovakian government of persecuting them. He declared that he was the protector of these Germans and demanded the Sudetenland be handed over. This was a manufactured crisis designed to justify invasion. Czechoslovakia was a democratic and militarily strong nation, and it had a defensive alliance with France. War now seemed truly imminent. The British Prime Minister at the time, Neville Chamberlain, desperately flew to Germany 3 times to try and talk peace. The result of these meetings was the Munich Agreement, signed at the end of September. In a desperate attempt to secure what Chamberlain famously called peace for our time, Britain and France agreed to let Germany take the Sudetenland. Czechoslovakian representatives were not even allowed in the room for their own dismemberment. They were betrayed by their allies and forced to accept the loss of their vital defensive fortifications. Less than 6 months later, Hitler broke his promise and swallowed the rest of Czechoslovakia entirely, proving that his word meant nothing and that appeasement had only delayed, not prevented, the inevitable conflict. As we enter the fateful summer of 1939, the timeline accelerates. The failure of appeasement was now crystal clear. Adolf Hitler's broken promise over Czechoslovakia proved he was not interested in just uniting German peoples, he was interested in conquest. His next demand was directed at Poland, specifically a city called Danzig and a strip of land known as the Polish Corridor, which separated mainland Germany from East Prussia. This time, however, Britain and France decided to draw a line in the sand. They issued a public guarantee to protect Polish independence, declaring that an attack on Poland would mean war. The world was now holding its breath, waiting for the German dictator's next move. The biggest strategic puzzle involved Germany's massive neighbor to the east, the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin. The ideologies of Nazism and communism were mortal enemies, and everyone assumed they would never cooperate. This assumption was shattered in late August 1939 by a diplomatic bombshell that stunned the world. The foreign ministers of Germany and the Soviet Union met and signed a non-aggression pact, known historically as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Publicly, it was a simple promise that the two giants would not attack each other. But this peace agreement contained a secret, sinister protocol. The two dictators agreed to carve up Eastern Europe between them, drawing a line right through the middle of Poland and assigning spheres of influence to the Baltic states. This pact eliminated the risk of a two-front war for Hitler, giving him the green light he needed. With his eastern flank secured by this deal with the devil, he set a date for the invasion. In the early hours of September 1, 1939, the silence was broken. Without a formal declaration of war, German battleships opened fire on a Polish garrison, and the massive German army stormed across the border. For the second time in a generation, a major European war had begun, and this time, it would not be contained. Welcome back. We are walking through the timeline, and now war is no longer a threat, it is a reality. On the first day of September, 1939, the German military unleashed a terrifying new doctrine of warfare upon Poland, and the world got its first real-time demonstration of the word blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This was not the static trench warfare of the First World War. This was a coordinated, high-speed attack designed to cause chaos and collapse the enemy's will to fight. Imagine the scene from a Polish soldier's or a civilian's perspective. The attack began with the roar of countless aircraft, the Luftwaffe, swarming over the skies. Their first targets were not the army on the front line but the Polish Air Force itself, destroyed while it was still on the ground. Then, they cut the lines of communication and bombed railway lines, making it impossible for the Polish command to move reinforcements. Chaos reigned from the very first hours. While the bombs were still falling, the ground assault began. Armored divisions, masses of tanks, smashed through the Polish border defenses at multiple points. They did not stop to secure every village. They drove deep into the rear areas, encircling entire Polish armies in massive pockets. The infantry that followed secured these pockets, and the whole force moved as one relentless, mechanized spear, a moving wall of fire and steel that advanced at an unprecedented speed. The Polish army, made up of brave soldiers and a legendary cavalry, was simply not mechanized to counter this combined arms assault. They fought heroically, with stories of cavalry charges against tanks becoming tragic symbols of their defiance, but their bravery could not stop a modern industrial war machine. As if this situation were not hopeless enough, the final, most brutal blow was just days away. Poland had been fighting for survival in the West, but on September 17th, a new, massive army struck them from the east. Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union, as secretly agreed upon, invaded to claim their half of the spoils. Poland was now caught in a giant, crushing pincer movement between two totalitarian superpowers. The government was forced to flee into exile, and organized defense became impossible. The capital city of Warsaw held out heroically under a merciless siege and bombardment for over 2 weeks, but it finally surrendered on September 27th. By early October, all fighting had ceased. The sovereign nation of Poland had been wiped off the map in just over a month, partitioned between Hitler and Stalin. The Lightning War had proven a shocking success. Continuing our timeline, a very strange and deceptive calm settled over Europe following the obliteration of Poland. On September 3rd, just 2 days after the German invasion, both Britain and France had officially declared war on Germany, honoring their promise to Poland. The world braced for an immediate, massive assault in the West. But nothing happened. On the French border with Germany, the two massive armies just sat and stared at each other. This period became known by different names: the Phony War in Britain, or the Sitzkrieg, the Sitting War, in Germany. For nearly 8 months, a strange quiet persisted. The French, entrenched behind their supposedly impenetrable Maginot Line fortifications, adopted a purely defensive posture. They fired a few token shots but made no real effort to attack Germany while its main army was busy in the east. This pause was a catastrophic strategic mistake for the Allies. It gave Adolf Hitler the time to move all his forces from Poland to the western border without any interference and refit his armored divisions. This period of waiting was not a true peace, it was a prelude to a storm. The only combat happened at sea, where German U-boats, their submarines, began a relentless campaign to sink merchant ships bringing supplies to Britain. The conflict there was very real from day one. The silent lull on land was finally shattered not on the French frontier, but in the north, in Scandinavia. In April of 1940, the war machine awoke and struck out of nowhere. The German objective was to secure iron ore shipments from Sweden that flowed through the coast of Norway. In a brilliantly executed and very audacious amphibious operation, German forces invaded both Denmark and Norway simultaneously. Denmark, a small and flat country with no real means of defense, was overrun in a matter of hours. Norway fought back, with heroic assistance from British and French expeditionary forces who landed on its jagged coastline. However, the German mastery of the air through the Luftwaffe proved decisive. By early June, the Allies had to withdraw from Norway, and the nation fell under German occupation. The Sitzkrieg was officially over. The shocking speed of the Scandinavian campaign served as a terrifying preview that the main event in Western Europe was about to be a disaster of unimaginable proportions. The waiting was over. The timeline now arrives at one of the most shocking and dramatic military campaigns in all of history. On May 10, 1940, the phony war was shattered as Germany launched its main offensive in the West. The attack was not just against France, it also swept through the neutral Low Countries, the Netherlands, and Belgium. The Dutch were bombed, and the major port city of Rotterdam was devastated. They surrendered after just 5 days of desperate fighting. Belgium was invaded, and a mighty fortress called Eben Emael, thought to be impregnable, was captured by a tiny group of German paratroopers landing silently in gliders on its roof. All of this, however, was a massive, brilliant, and absolutely fatal deception. The main Allied plan was to rush their best armies north into Belgium the moment they were attacked, to meet the German advance head-on on what they assumed was the main battlefield. This is exactly what the German High Command wanted them to do. The real, decisive thrust was happening further south, through a terrain feature that French military planners had arrogantly dismissed as impassable for a modern armored army, the Ardennes Forest. A colossal traffic jam of German panzer tanks, stretching back 100 miles, squeezed through these narrow, winding forest roads. The French believed it was impossible, so the sector was very thinly defended by old reserve units. When the German spearhead emerged from the forest at the town of Sedan, the Allied High Command was in total shock. They had been fooled completely. The panzers then did not turn south towards Paris, but raced in a sickle-cut pattern westwards towards the English Channel, severing the supply and communication lines of the elite Allied armies who were now trapped deep inside Belgium. The British, French, and Belgian forces in the north were caught in a giant pocket with their backs to the sea. The situation was hopeless, and a miracle was needed. That miracle came in the form of a decision by Adolf Hitler himself, who issued a controversial halt order to his tanks, giving the Allies a brief, critical window. An emergency call went out to Britain for every seaworthy vessel. A massive, desperate fleet of Navy ships, fishing boats, and pleasure yachts converged on the single port of Dunkirk. Under constant air attack, over 300,000 soldiers were miraculously evacuated back to England, saving the core of the British Army, but France's fate was sealed. With the fall of France in June of 1940, a dark and terrifying reality settled across the world. The European continent was now almost entirely under a system of brutal occupation. Adolf Hitler stood on the coast of France, looking across the English Channel at the white cliffs of Dover. The island of Britain stood completely alone. Its army had survived the evacuation at Dunkirk, but it had left behind virtually all of its heavy equipment, its tanks, and its artillery. A German invasion, codenamed Operation Sea Lion, seemed not just possible but inevitable. The first condition for this invasion was absolute air superiority. The mighty German Luftwaffe had to destroy the British Royal Air Force to prevent it from bombing a German invasion fleet as it crossed the Channel. And so, in the summer of 1940, the first great battle fought entirely in the air began. This was the Battle of Britain. The German tactic was to attack the coastal radar stations, the airfields, and the aircraft factories. On the other side, the young pilots of the Royal Air Force, the very few, were scrambling into their Spitfires and Hurricanes multiple times a day, running on exhaustion and adrenaline. It was a battle of attrition. The British were losing pilots faster than they could train new ones, and their airfields were being cratered by German bombs. Then came a fateful, unintentional mistake that changed the course of the war. A small group of German bombers, lost in the night sky, accidentally dropped their payload on the City of London. In retaliation, the British Royal Air Force launched a small bombing raid on Berlin. The psychological blow of having the German capital bombed enraged Hitler. He publicly announced a change of strategy, ordering the Luftwaffe to abandon its attacks on the struggling British airfields and to start bombing London and other cities. This was the Blitz. For 57 consecutive nights, German bombs rained down on civilian London. The city burned, but this shift gave the Royal Air Force Fighter Command a moment to breathe. They could repair their airfields, pull back their squadrons, and finally inflict unsustainable losses on the German bombers. By September 17, Hitler realized his pilots had failed. He indefinitely postponed the invasion of Britain. The island had survived, and the myth of the German army's invincibility was broken for the first time, thanks to the courage of those the Prime Minister famously called the few. We have reached a pivotal turning point on our timeline, where the conflict becomes a true world war, primarily through two massive and apocalyptic events. The first event occurred on the other side of the globe. While Britain stood alone, tensions between the United States and Japan had been building for years over Japan's brutal war of expansion in China. By December of 1941, the United States Pacific Fleet, stationed at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, was seen by the Japanese as the only obstacle to their complete domination of Southeast Asia. On the quiet morning of Sunday, December 7th, that obstacle was attacked. Without a formal declaration of war, waves of Japanese aircraft, launched from aircraft carriers, descended on the unsuspecting naval base. In a devastating 2-hour assault, battleships were sunk at their moorings, hundreds of aircraft were destroyed on the ground, and over 2,000 American servicemen lost their lives. The next day, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation, calling it a date which will live in infamy, and the United States declared war on Japan. 3 days later, for reasons of alliance, Adolf Hitler declared war on the United States. The immense industrial and military power of the sleeping giant was now fully awakened and committed to the total defeat of the Axis powers. The second major turning point came in the European theater, deep inside the Soviet Union. In 1941, Hitler had broken his non-aggression pact and launched the largest invasion in history, a surprise attack on the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa. By the summer of 1942, the German army had pushed deep into the country and arrived at a city on the Volga River that bore the Soviet leader's name, Stalingrad. The battle for this city was not about territory, it was about a symbolic struggle between the two dictators. The fighting descended into a hellish nightmare. It was a sniper's war, fought room by room in shattered factories and apartment buildings. The Germans reached the riverbank but could not dislodge the Soviet defenders. Then, in November, the Soviet Red Army launched a massive counter-offensive, Operation Uranus. Instead of attacking the strong German front line, they smashed through the weakly defended flanks, held by demoralized Romanian and Italian allies, and completely encircled the German Sixth Army inside the city. Adolf Hitler ordered them not to retreat, to fight to the last bullet. For months, surrounded and starving in the frozen winter, the German soldiers suffered unimaginably. By the end of January, 1943, the remnants of the once mighty army surrendered. Stalingrad was the psychological and military breaking point of the German war machine in the East, and from that moment on, the tide would only flow in one direction. We have arrived at the final chapter of our timeline. The tide had irrevocably turned. In the East, the Soviet Red Army was grinding the German forces back in a series of massive, costly offensives. In the South, the Allies had landed in Italy, and the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini had been toppled. But the decisive blow, the second front that Joseph Stalin had been demanding for years, was about to fall upon occupied France. On June 6, 1944, a date forever remembered as D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in the history of the world was launched. A colossal armada of thousands of ships crossed the English Channel and landed 150,000 soldiers on 5 beaches along the coast of Normandy. By the end of the day, the Atlantic Wall was breached at a terrible cost, and the liberation of Western Europe had begun. Paris was liberated in August, and a sense of euphoria spread. That joy was tempered in the winter, however, by a desperate German counterattack through the Ardennes forest, the Battle of the Bulge, which created a major crisis before it was finally crushed. As the spring of 1945 arrived, the Third Reich was being physically crushed from 2 sides. The Western Allies were crossing the Rhine River, and the Soviets were battling their way into Berlin. In the underground bunker of the city, Adolf Hitler, the architect of this global nightmare, committed suicide. On May 8, 1945, the German High Command surrendered unconditionally. The day became known as Victory in Europe Day, and a weary, half-destroyed continent celebrated. But the war in the Pacific was not over. Japan continued to resist with a savage ferocity, using kamikaze attacks and preparing for a bloody defense of the home islands. A new American president, Harry Truman, was faced with a terrifying calculation: an invasion of Japan, called Operation Downfall, could cost 1 million Allied casualties. He authorized the use of a terrifying new weapon to force a surrender and avoid that horrific invasion. On August 6, a single atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, followed by a second on Nagasaki 3 days later. Faced with this unimaginable destruction, and the entry of the Soviet Union into the war against Japan, the Emperor himself intervened. Japan announced its unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945. The Second World War was finally, totally, over. The world that emerged was profoundly changed, with new superpowers and a new, fragile hope for a peace that would truly last, embodied in the creation of the United Nations. And that brings us to the end of our journey through the timeline of World War II. The story is brutal and tragic, but understanding the sequence, the mistakes, and the courage is how we honor the memory of the millions who lived through it. If this walk through history was helpful for you, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our next deep dive. Share your thoughts in the comments, but as always, keep it respectful. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.